Meeting is
The
now
title of
being
this presentation is 5 Ways to Improve Agency Value. My name is Jared Roy. I have with me Josh Morgan.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Just also want to mention this is the first in a series of free educational webinars that MarshBerry will be offering. We're going to talk about the next in the series toward the end of the presentation. We're delighted that you're joining us, and I'll turn it over to Jared to get us started.
Our agenda for today, first of all, we're going to go about 30 minutes. We're going to work real hard to stay tight on that time frame. We're going to give you a little overview on MarshBerry. If you don't know who we are and what we do, hopefully this will give you a little bit of understanding the value of agencies, how we can improve it. We'll give you some tips and tricks there, as well as talk about some solutions, and then we'll wrap and leave some time for Q&A and a discussion at the end. First of all, MarshBerry, if you don't know, we are a management consulting firm specifically focused on helping independent agencies improve their business. We've been around since we're privately held, and I talk to agency owners all the time about perpetuation, and we have done that in our own organization. So in a sense, we practice what we preach. So we have perpetuated. Larry has gone into retirement, and we have 19 shareholders now. Our goal is to help distributors learn, improve, and realize their fullest business potential. Now, what I mean by that is we have 4 departments that we have services in. Those folks improve all aspects of their organization with regards to exchange networks, as well as realize their fullest business potential at the time of their transition in the way of the M&A advisory services that we have 6 networks with over 186 partners across North America, and these clients represent over $2 billion in revenue. I say that to give a little credibility to the data that we'll provide, the experience that we've gained from managing.
So as Jared mentioned, we're going to get us started by talking about the history of agency value before we get into the components and actual calculation of value. And that number originates from the 1970s with the formula you see on the screen. We're going to talk about why you should shy away from percent tax times a 10 times after-tax earnings multiple yields 1.5 million divided by a million, which is where you get the 1. Result, but moving forward, we're going to talk about why this is an expression of value and not the way you should calculate value.
There's a couple components that go into agency value, and a variety of reasons. And in our expertise in agency valuations, we found, again, there's 2 components that go into agency value. The first is the book of business value. You can think of this as the income statement. And the book of business value is important because it's the value valuations, we'll make pro forma adjustments, which will take out owner discretions, things like vehicles that are being run through the agency, or sales meetings that are occurring maybe in Maui, and the other factor that goes into this is risk assessment. Depending on the risk associated with the business, for example, you might have an agency that has a very large percentage of their revenue with one account. That would business value is it has an exponential effect on long-term value. If you remember from the previous slide, $1 of after-tax earnings can yield $10 in value. So it has a huge impact on value. On the other hand, your tangible net worth, which is your balance computers, desks, cash. These are valued dollar for dollar in a transaction, or when you're thinking of agency value. So if you have a $100 chair, that chair is worth $100. Cash, a multiple of the revenue. Josh shared a little history and why we do that, how that came about. And I want to clarify this because I've heard agency owners talk about this quite a bit. And if you're talking about agency value, is to use an earnings multiple. That's a true calculation of the value. So we're going to go through a process to make several calculations to discuss what the earnings multiple is, and we'll talk more about this in a later slide. The fair market value of what that agency could be worth on the open market, or even if you're discussing an internal transition in the way of a perpetuation. If you don't know, EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Think of it as pre-tax profit for these examples. And what I'm going to take you through is a quick trick that you can EBITDA. The multiple we're going to use is 6. So that means we're looking at 6 times EBITDA for the value of that agency. So the easy way to do this in your head is to take the first digit of the EBITDA percentage, which in this case is 2. So multiply that by the EBITDA multiple. Example. This agency is a little more profitable, 30% EBITDA, and the EBITDA multiple we've arrived at here is 7. So to use the same trick we just learned, we have it sunk in. Let's look at one last example. 25% revenue, EBITDA multiple 6.12589. We here at MarshBerry attention. Of course, the book of business value is 1.53. But hopefully, if you've learned something from this slide, it's an easy way to transition back and forth if you've got nice round numbers between revenue multiples and EBITDA multiples. So without further ado, let's let the countdown to the 5 ways to improve value begin.
Okay, so number 5, make wise acquisitions. Now, in the last 2 years, I've been in the office of about 80 different insurance agencies around the country. Most of the agency owners I meet with get into trouble by valuing based on revenues, not putting together a realistic valuation or performing some form of due diligence, or they trade down and acquire an agency that's not as profitable as theirs. Comes to making acquisitions. So moving on, number 4, employment agreements. You got to remember, non-owned books of business are not included in agency value. It's very common for me to meet agency owners who do not own their producer's book, and they believe their agency is just as valuable as another agency that owns. If you don't own that book, the value is in their hands. So here are a few tips and things you might want to include in an actual employment agreement. A covenant not to compete. Anti-slice golf club. And he sold this design to TaylorMade, and when he did, they asked him not to enter the marketplace and compete with this design with another company. And so he gratefully signed the agreement because they were paying him a lot of money, and so he agreed not to enter the marketplace. He signed a covenant not to compete. So means that when a producer leaves an agency, they can't take employees from their prior agency with them. And so I want to encourage you, you can email us after this presentation's over. We're going to have our email addresses up. And if you would like, we can send you a sample producer employment agreement with many of the things that we recommend. It's very boilerplate. We know that in every state it's a little bit different, but it's a great starting point. And we'd be happy to send that out to you. So moving on to number 3.
The group of folks that you see in the picture there is a diverse group, and I like to think that they make a good team, and that kind of leads and group of folks is priceless. I mean, it's important to have a good employee team in any organization, let alone an insurance agency, where much of your performance is based on the intellectual capital and the folks that you have behind you. So a couple things we'll talk about here. The main takeaway is to pay for high-quality employees. Higher quality employees come with a higher cost, but with that, also greater value. Making $50,000 a year, doing an average performance with their workload, or take one person that could be more efficient, more productive, possibly do the work of 2 people, making $75,000 a year. So we think the answer to that is obvious, and desks, chairs, tables, computers, resources, and it doesn't have to be tangible things. These could be intangible items that they consume as well. PTO causes more downtime if you have more folks, costs more money to do cross-training, and then you have a good team of employees that are working towards the goals of the organization, then you're going to be much more productive from a big picture standpoint, as well as have a better agency. And before I go into this slide, if you remember anything about this presentation, please remember these two little tips that we're going to give you. They're very easy things that we've talked about. One of the first things we talk about with an agency when we do a consulting session is whether or not you have a master cell phone contract. So just ask yourself this question. Of the folks on the call, how many of you have a master contract carriers are better in certain parts of the country? We realize that here. We have a similar situation in Cleveland, Ohio. But if you take advantage of multiple users, you can save a lot of money on those contracts over minute usage. Some other examples of penalties and fees that you could incur are sometimes a producer may just not want to use a phone anymore, and there's a fee associated with that for canceling a contract, for and you don't have a master contract in place. One other example potentially could be you have folks that change carriers simply because their spouse is on a different plan. So these are the types of things that we want to try to help you control. The next item is quite simply a check review. And the process and how this works is you take one person in your agency, preferably an owner, somebody with a vested interest in the business, and they will review all outgoing checks for a period of a week. Better yet, do it for a month. So it's going to do a couple things. Obviously, keep you in touch with the outgoing expenditures that are happening, and if you do publicly announce it, it will cause the rest of the folks in your organization potentially to think twice about things that they may be spending money on that shouldn't be expenses, and also give you an opportunity to tighten the reins in the future, because there will be the illusion that this is continuing, and we've hit entry that was outgoing to a vendor, and once they corrected it, this saved them hundreds of dollars a month in expense that was going out to a vendor. So huge impact over the course of a year. Another example, and I've called Christmas in July, was that an agency found that a Christmas tree was purchased the third Christmas tree they had was still in the box, and they already had two other Christmas trees, and it just didn't make sense to have a third one. Additional vacuum cleaner was purchased. They had multiple vacuum cleaners already, and they couldn't even find the fourth vacuum cleaner. And so the fear was that potentially it had grown legs and walked home, possibly with the person who purchased it. We hope you don't find this situation in your agency, but just a couple examples of the things that you can correct by going through this small change and just a simple exercise.
2012 is to learn from high performers. How can you do that? Join a peer group. You can take advantage of the skills and experience of others via this peer group. There are other people who've already figured out your challenges or can at least tell you what not to do. You can share strategies, network. That's hokey. No one knows our agency like we do. We're on an island. We haven't found that to be the case, and we have some data that we'd like to present to illustrate exactly what we've seen in our. First, we want to talk about the actual hard data that we've seen come out of this group in terms of value creation over the last 15 years or so.
Left axis, you can see performance indicator number, which is a numerical value we calculate in our group with the benchmarking that we do. The only thing you need to understand here is this is a number. As Josh mentioned, we have our Apex network, which we'll talk about more in a second, but there's a handful of agencies that correlated to a revenue multiple of 1.4. We just ran this data again, and today that same founders group, which are still in the network right now, have raised their PIN to over 7, which correlates to a revenue multiple. But their value as well. So I've shaded the area where they have an increase in value, and by doing all the right things, networking with other agencies, learning from their peers, not reinventing the wheel, they have created 0.5 times revenue in value creation over time, over the last. Created $500,000 in value. So if your agency is $1 million agency, that's $500,000. If it's a $5 million agency, that's 2.5. Part of a peer network that you can learn from and share with your peers.
So to get into the hard numbers from that previous chart, the year 1997, the PIN 5.96. Remember, PIN is just another way to talk about profitability and overall performance. Agencies multiple at that time, 1.4. If you take revenue times 1.4, you get the value a little under $5.5 million. Now in today's terms, 2011, the PIN has improved to 7.35. The multiple has improved to 1.9. Now if you take today's revenue times 1.9, you get 17 million. So in overall terms, revenue growth at 136%, year-over-year compound average growth rate at 6.3%. Now, in terms of value, the value growth has grown 220% with a compound annual growth rate is that value has increased faster than revenue by 38% on an annual basis. And that's because they're leveraging time spent in the networks, those relationships, the data, the best practices that they've acquired. Let me say that again. The value has increased 38 times faster than revenue in that time period. It's really a staggering figure, and we always bring it up when we back up the power of joining a peer network like our Apex group. And with that being said, the Apex group, it's a best practices benchmarking executive level network. We have about 100 agencies with an average revenue of $7 to $9 million. So that's just how we define Apex, our own personal peer network.
Benefits of being part of a network, specifically the Apex network, are as follows. Our network helps agencies improve. We have 3 benefits that we categorize them in: benchmarking, and that's where the actual networking itself that happens at the meetings throughout the year. There's an online exchange that happens exclusively through a forum that we've created, and we are constantly providing information regarding the industry as well as ongoing training to the folks that are part of our network. So I'd like to share with you a little we call our Improve Apex Summit. This is the spring installment. It's a 2.5-day semi-annual meeting. There are several aspects that are going to be presented here. The first, which is the most talked about presentation we have annually, is the State of the Industry presentation. This is given by our president, John Webler. And for those of you to sit in on this, you will learn a ton of insight on what's going on in the market with regards to carriers and whether it be healthcare reform or what to expect. We have a general session this time focused on healthcare reform. Several of our partners, including some of our consultants on our staff, are very optimistic about what's going on. Obviously, we're still not sure exactly what's to come, but we have experts that will present on that. Our strategic issues groups, we call them 12 packs. There's 8 to 10 agencies. That's happening. Educational breakout sessions that we are providing this time are employee recognition, the future of technology, as well as compensation, which we found to be a really hot topic that agencies want to talk about. And how we can make that happen for you.
So if you'd like to attend as a partner nominee, we do have a pre-qualification process. Waive the registration fees. You can network with over 100 of our members from all around the country, attend all the things that Jared just mentioned, the state group peer session that's facilitated by a MarshBerry consultant, exchange information, share strategies, things of that nature. So again, feel free to contact us when we're at the end of this So with that being said, one of our members has actually offered in the past that the type of agency that should join Apex is one that wants to grow, perpetuate, and take their business to the next level. So it's not just that you want to improve your value sort of half-half. They want to take their business to the next level, and in many cases, they want to perpetuate internally. So that's Kerry Morris. So with that being said, we'll just wrap up. We talked about the history of value, how to properly calculate value, closer toward earnings. You can actually talk about value in revenue. That's fine. We gave you some tips on how to calculate value in a quick mathematical way. And we also talked about the 5 ways to improve your value. So as a quick reminder, Jared or Josh, our emails are up there, or give us a call. If you have any questions and want to talk about any of the things that we've mentioned on a one-to-one basis, please give us a call.
Since no one spoke up too quickly, I'd like to ask the question.
Copy of the slides.
I'm sorry?
PDF of the slides, and so expect that if you registered for the webinar, and go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. I had a question, a real fundamental question about EBITDA that I've never had anyone answer. If you're a sub-S corporation,
well, we look at it a couple different ways, but when you look at the way we calculate EBITDA, the way it's in its purest form, we're taking the, by definition, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. When we look at I think your question goes around the fact that whether it's profit that goes to the owner whether it's excess earnings that goes to the owner or the profitability of the corporation, it doesn't have any impact because that's going to go and the tax is going to be paid by the individual. Because we do it on a pro forma basis, and when you look at the multiples you saw up there, let's say the 20%, that is a pro forma EBITDA number which has removed excess earnings. That if you were an owner, you would take it as being an owner.
right? Okay. Thank you.
So did I answer your question?
I think so.
Okay. I think the main difference is that we're looking at on a pro forma basis, which normalizes the compensation of the owner.
You're welcome. Anyone else out there? Well, with that being said, we want to thank you again for joining us, and again want to mention that we're going to invite you to our next in a series of webinars. It's going to be on recruiting high-performing producers. It's going to be a really great webinar, and we're going to send you that invitation in the next few days, so look for that. And again, thanks for joining us. If you have